Late afternoon, Johannesburg. The room was quiet enough that the ticking wall clock sounded louder than usual. Her phone vibrated once. Not a call. Just a message. Leleti read it. A short sentence, cold, almost careless. She didn't reply. The phone stayed in her hand for a few seconds longer than necessary, the screen still glowing faintly in the dim light. Then she placed it face down on the table. Slowly. As if the table itself might break. Outside, somewhere down the street, a taxi hooted. People were still moving through the city, still arguing about traffic, still laughing over cheap coffee and corner cafes. But inside the room, nothing moved. Leleti sat there. Still, at 55, she had already lived several lives. The kind of lives people write scripts about. Stages, cameras, applause. Bright lights that never seemed to turn off. And yet, the moment that sat in front of her now, this small moment with a single text message, felt heavier than any scene she had ever performed. She rubbed her thumb along the edge of the phone, not nervously, just slowly, like someone trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. On the wall across from her, a framed photograph hung slightly crooked. An old one, years ago, a premiere night, red carpet, flashing cameras. Someone had shouted her name over and over. "Leleti, over here, smile!" She had smiled. Of course she had. Back then, the cameras loved her. The crowd pressed forward just to see her step out of a car. Directors whispered about her talent like it was something rare. Something dangerous even. But photographs don't show the quiet parts. They never do. They don't show the drive home afterward when the city lights blur together through a car window. They don't show the silence inside a house that feels too big once the applause disappears. The message on the phone was still there, waiting. She could open it again, read it again. Maybe the words would change. They didn't. Her eyes moved toward the window. Johannesburg looked ordinary today. The sky pale, the late sun resting against the tops of buildings. Laundry hanging on a balcony across the street fluttered gently in the wind. Life moving forward, carelessly. Someone, somewhere, had once told her that tragedy arrives quietly. Not like in the movies. Not with dramatic music or heavy rain. Just a message, a phone call. A sentence you wish had never been written. 55. The number felt strange when she thought about it. Not old. Not young. Just somewhere in the middle. A place where the past begins to whisper louder than the future. She leaned back in the chair. For a moment her eyes closed. Memories didn't arrive in order. They never do. They come like fragments. Pieces of conversations. Half-finished laughter. A door closing somewhere. She remembered a rehearsal room years ago. Wooden floor. Dust floating in sunlight. Someone reading lines too quickly. Someone else correcting the rhythm. And her voice. Clear, strong. A voice that had carried entire stories. People used to say she could make a room hold its breath. Just by standing still. Just by saying one sentence. But breath is a fragile thing. And sometimes silence is louder than applause. Her phone vibrated again. Another message. She didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she looked down at her hands. The same hands that had held scripts, awards, microphones. Hands that had waved to crowds. Hands that had signed autographs for strangers who said her work had changed their lives. Now they rested quietly on the table. Almost tired. Outside, the light was fading faster. Johannesburg. Evenings come like that. One moment, the sky is soft and gold. The next moment, the shadows grow longer, slipping between buildings and across empty streets. Leleti finally turned the phone over again. The second message was shorter, just 3 words. She stared at them for a long time. No tears, not yet. Only that strange stillness that sometimes arrives before a storm, when the air feels too heavy, when even breathing seems louder than it should. Across the room, the crooked photograph shifted slightly as the evening breeze touched the wall. In the picture, she was laughing, head thrown back, eyes bright, a moment frozen forever, unaware of the years that would follow. Leleti looked at it, then back at the phone. Somewhere in the city, music started playing from a distant bar. Someone cheering, someone shouting lyrics off-key. Life continuing, always continuing. She placed the phone down again. Not carefully this time, just there. The room darkened slowly around her, and for a long time she sat without moving, the unread message glowing faintly in the quiet Johannesburg evening. 55. Just a number. 2 small digits. But tonight it felt heavier than it should, like a door closing somewhere far down a hallway. Not loudly, just quietly. The room was still dim. Johannesburg evening sliding slowly into night. The streetlights outside had begun to blink on one by one, like tired eyes opening after a long day. Leleti was still sitting at the same table. She hadn't moved much. The phone lay beside her hand now, its screen dark again. The messages were still there, of course. They didn't disappear just because she looked away. 55. A strange age. People expect stability at this point. Calm. Wisdom. A life that has finally settled into something predictable. But nothing about the moment sitting in this room felt settled. Across the table sat a small notebook. The cover worn at the corners, pages slightly bent from years of being opened and closed. Inside it were notes, fragments, half-written thoughts, lines from scripts she once practiced late into the night. One page had a single sentence written across the middle. She turned the page slowly. The paper made a soft sound. For a long time she simply stared at the handwriting. Outside, a car passed. The headlights briefly slid across the wall and disappeared again. That light touched the photograph for just a second. The one from years ago. Red carpet. Flashes exploding like lightning. People shouting her name. Leleti! Someone pushing a microphone forward. Just one photo! Back then, the world had seemed loud. Crowded. Impossible to escape. People remembered her voice first. Then her eyes. Then the way she could hold silence on stage longer than anyone else. Directors liked that. They said she understood pauses, that she knew when a story didn't need words. But tonight the pause felt different. This wasn't theater. No audience. No director standing in the shadows waiting to say, cut. Just a quiet house. A quiet evening. And a woman sitting in the middle of it. 55. Some people would say she had already lived an extraordinary life. Stages across South Africa. Film sets that stretched from sunrise to midnight. Crowds that waited outside theaters just to see her walk through the door. They remembered those things. The performances, the awards, the applause. But very few people knew about the mornings. The mornings when she woke before the sun because sleep had become difficult. The kind of mornings where the house felt too silent and coffee cooled untouched on the kitchen counter. Fame does strange things to time. Years disappear faster than anyone expects. One moment you are running between rehearsals. The next moment you are sitting in a quiet room wondering how it all passed so quickly. Leleti leaned forward slightly. The chair creaked under her weight. She picked up the notebook again, flipping through several pages without really reading them. Names appeared. Dates. Small reminders written in hurried handwriting. One page had a theater schedule from years ago. Another had a quote she once copied during rehearsal. The ink had faded slightly, but the words were still there. She closed the notebook. Slowly, her reflection appeared faintly in the dark window beside her. Not perfectly clear, just the outline of someone sitting alone in a half-lit room. The face was older now, lines around the eyes, a softness where the sharpness of youth had once been. But the gaze was still the same. People who knew her from the stage would recognize that gaze immediately. The one that could hold a room still. The one that could make an audience lean forward without realizing it. She had used that gaze in countless performances. But tonight, there was no audience to hold. Only the quiet. And the number. 55. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed faintly through the city. Johannesburg never really sleeps. Even at night, there are always small sounds drifting through the air. Taxis, radios, footsteps on pavement. But inside the house, the silence remained. Leleti stood up slowly. The movement seemed to surprise the room itself. The chair slid back slightly across the floor. She walked toward the window. Outside, the city lights had grown brighter now, spreading across the streets like scattered stars. Somewhere a group of people were laughing loudly. The sound carried up through the cool evening air. She rested one hand against the glass. The reflection in the window looked back at her. 55. Many people still remembered her under stage lights. Standing tall, voice strong, crowds clapping so loudly the theater walls seemed to vibrate. But tonight, there was no stage. No spotlight, only a quiet room, and a woman standing by the window in Johannesburg. Behind her, on the table, the phone lit up again, the screen glowing softly in the dark. On the table, the tea had gone cold. Not just warm, cold. A thin skin had formed on the surface. Leleti didn't touch it. Beside the cup sat a script, old. The paper was slightly yellow now. The corner folded many times over the years. She pulled it closer. Not quickly, just slowly enough that the paper made that soft dragging sound across the wood. The first page had a name written across the top. In thick black ink. Her name. She looked at it for a moment, then turned the page. Page 2. A paragraph of dialogue. 3 lines. Her eyes moved across the first sentence, then stopped. She didn't read the rest. Outside the window, someone slammed a car door. A dog barked once, then again. Johannesburg evenings often sounded like that. Small bursts of life scattered through the quiet. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick, tick, tick. Each second sounding strangely louder now. Leleti leaned forward slightly. Her elbow touched the table. The teacup shifted a little. She steadied it without thinking. A small habit. The kind people develop without noticing. Her fingers lingered around the cup for a moment. The ceramic was cool now. Completely cool. She used to drink tea during rehearsals. Always the same way. One sip between scenes, another while someone adjusted the lights, another while the director spoke too long about pacing. The cup would always empty before the end of rehearsal. Tonight it hadn't moved. On the other side of the table sat a small bowl. Inside were 2 wrapped sugar cubes, still unopened. The wrappers slightly crinkled. Someone had brought them weeks ago. She never used them. She preferred bitter tea. Always had. The script page moved slightly when a breeze slipped through the open window. Just a little. The paper lifted, then settled again. Her eyes followed the movement. She noticed something she hadn't seen before. A small pen mark near the bottom of the page. A correction. A word crossed out. Another written above it. The handwriting wasn't hers. A director's note, maybe? Or someone from the production team years ago? The ink had faded to a dull gray. She traced the line with her finger. Lightly, not touching the ink, just following the shape of the letters. Across the room, a chair stood near the wall. An ordinary wooden chair. A coat hung over the back of it, the sleeve nearly touching the floor. She had dropped it there earlier without thinking. Now it looked almost like someone sitting quietly in the corner. Waiting. Leleti noticed that, and gave a faint breath of something that wasn't quite a laugh. Just air leaving the chest. The city sounds outside shifted again. A distant radio playing music. Bass vibrating softly through the night air. The melody was familiar. She couldn't place it, but it reminded her of a theater dressing room somewhere long ago. The smell of makeup powder. Warm stage lights leaking under a door. Someone humming that exact melody while adjusting their costume. She blinked. The room returned. The quiet. The table. The tea. Her phone buzzed once. Not loudly. Just a soft vibration against the wood. The sound made the spoon inside the teacup tremble slightly. A small metallic click. She looked at the phone, but didn't pick it up. The screen lit the edge of the script page. Just enough light to make the text clearer. One line stood out now. A line she had spoken on stage many years ago. She remembered it instantly. Not because she tried to remember. Because the body remembers things long after the mind stops thinking about them. Her lips moved slightly, not speaking the line, just shaping the first word. Then she stopped. The phone buzzed again. This time it moved a few millimeters closer to the edge of the table. She watched it. Still didn't touch it. Instead, her attention drifted back to the script. She turned another page. Page 3. A stage direction written in small letters. Pause. Just that. Pause. She stared at the word. Longer than expected. Across the room, the clock continued its steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. The breeze shifted again. The curtain near the window lifted slightly, then fell. The teacup remained untouched. The sugar cubes still wrapped. The script opened to page 3, and Leleti Khumalo sat there quietly in the dim Johannesburg evening, her finger resting lightly on that single word printed in the margin. Pause. Leleti stood by the window. The glass was slightly cold against her fingers. Outside the street was still awake. A minibus taxi rolled past slowly, music leaking out through half-open windows. 2 teenagers crossed the road without looking, laughing about something only they understood. A woman stood at the corner kiosk counting coins in her palm. The traffic light turned red. Cars stopped, engines humming quietly. Inside the house, nothing moved. The script was still open on the table. Page 3. The word pause resting there like it had been waiting all evening. A thin line of wind slipped through the open window and touched the edge of the paper. The page lifted a little, then settled again. On the kitchen counter, a small plate held half a slice of bread, the crust already dry. Next to it stood a jar of honey with the lid resting sideways, a spoon inside. No one had touched it. The refrigerator motor clicked on for a few seconds, then off again. Leleti remained by the window, one hand resting on the frame. The streetlight outside flickered once before holding steady. Its yellow glow spread across the pavement, catching the silver roof of a parked car. A man walked past with a plastic bag swinging from his wrist. He stopped to check something on his phone, typed quickly, then continued walking. Across the street, someone pulled a curtain closed. The window went dark. Behind Leleti, the clock continued. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was steady, unbothered. Her phone lit up again on the table. A brief glow, then darkness. No sound this time. Just the screen lighting the edge of the notebook for a second before fading. A train moved somewhere far beyond the buildings. The deep metal rumble reached the house a few seconds later. Low, slow, gone again. Leleti adjusted the sleeve of her sweater slightly. The fabric had stretched a little near the wrist. A loose thread hung there. She twisted it once around her finger, then let it go. Outside, a motorcycle passed too quickly, the engine sharp against the quiet street. A child's voice called out from somewhere. Wait! Footsteps followed, running, then fading. The tea on the table had cooled completely now. The spoon inside had leaned against the side of the cup. Still, a small drop of tea had dried near the rim. The script page shifted again when the breeze returned. Page 3 lifted slightly. Then another page beneath it moved. Page 4. The pages did not turn fully. They simply hovered, half open. Leleti turned her head slightly, not toward the phone, toward the photograph on the wall. The frame reflected the streetlight. For a moment, the glass looked bright, then dim again. A car horn sounded 2 streets away. Another answered. Someone shouted something out of a window. Laughter followed. In the kitchen, the honey jar tilted slightly when the refrigerator motor started again. The spoon inside the jar touched the glass. A faint clink. Leleti stepped back from the window. One step, then another. Her foot brushed lightly against the leg of the chair. The coat hanging there slid a little lower. One sleeve touched the floor. She didn't fix it. The phone screen lit once more. Longer this time. A new message. The glow stretched across the table surface, touching the edge of the script, illuminating the word again. Pause. Leleti walked toward the table, slowly. Her chair remained where she had left it earlier. She stopped beside it. The clock continued. Tick, tick, tick. Outside, another taxi passed. The bass from the music vibrated briefly through the window glass. Then silence returned. Her hand rested on the back of the chair. The wood was smooth, slightly worn where hands had touched it over the years. She remained standing. The phone screen faded. Dark again. On the table, the script remained open. Page 3. Page 4 beneath it. The edge of the paper moving slightly whenever the breeze returned. In the kitchen, the honey jar leaned quietly beside the plate of bread. The spoon still inside, unmoved. Outside, the traffic light changed again. Green. Cars moved forward, headlights sliding across the window. For a moment, the room brightened. Then the light passed. Leleti stayed there beside the chair. Behind her, the curtain lifted slightly once more. The night air entered the room, cool, carrying the distant sound of footsteps on the pavement. Then even those faded, and the house returned to its quiet again. Later that night, the phone rang. Not the short vibration from earlier. A real call. The sound filled the quiet room for a few seconds. Leleti looked at the screen. A name appeared. She watched it ring. Once. Twice. Then the screen went dark again. No voicemail. Just silence returning to the table. The script was still open. The same 2 pages. The word pause still there. Somewhere after midnight, a taxi stopped outside the building. A door opened. Closed. Footsteps passed along the pavement and faded toward the next street. Inside the apartment, the kitchen light had been left on. A small yellow square of light spilling into the hallway. The honey jar remained where it was. The spoon inside had slipped deeper into the glass. The teacup still untouched. By morning, the news would begin moving. Quietly at first. One cancelled rehearsal. Then another. A theater manager in Durban mentioning a schedule change. A production assistant in Cape Town forwarding an email that simply said, postponed. No explanation. Just that word. A few days later, a small article appeared online. Not on the front page. Buried halfway down the entertainment section. 3 paragraphs. A short headline. It mentioned a production that would not open this season. It mentioned a casting adjustment. It mentioned her name once. No quotes. No details. Just a line at the end. Sources say the change was unexpected. People read it, then moved on to other stories. In Johannesburg, a taxi driver listening to the radio heard the announcement of another show replacing the one that had been planned. He turned the volume down. Didn't think much about it. A stage technician somewhere folded a lighting plan and placed it in a drawer. A costume designer packed 2 dresses into a garment bag and wrote a date on the tag. Later, the date was crossed out, rewritten, crossed out again. No one said why. Leleti did not speak about it either. Once, during a brief phone conversation with someone from the theater, she answered a question. Only 1 sentence, her voice calm. Quiet. There are moments, she said, when silence is easier. The line stayed in the air for a second. Then the call ended. That evening, the apartment looked almost the same as before. The same table. The same cup. The same script. But the window had been opened wider. The curtain moved more freely now. Johannesburg air sliding into the room. On the table, the script had been closed. Not neatly, just folded shut. A small paper marker placed halfway through. No one could tell which scene it marked. The notebook remained nearby. 1 page now held a new line written in blue ink. Only 3 words. No date beside them. No explanation. Just the words. The handwriting looked slower than usual. Outside the building, 2 teenagers leaned against a car talking about football. One of them kicked an empty bottle across the pavement. The sound echoed briefly between the buildings. Then quiet again. Somewhere down the block, a woman watered plants on her balcony. Drops of water fell to the ground below. Leleti stood near the kitchen counter. The honey jar had been closed now. The spoon washed and left beside the sink. She picked up the cup of tea, looked at it, then poured the cold liquid down the drain. The sink made a hollow sound as the water disappeared. In the living room, the photograph on the wall remained slightly crooked. The red carpet knight still frozen inside the frame. Cameras flashing. Her head tilted back in laughter. Across the room, the phone lit once more. A new message. The screen glowed softly on the dark table. Leleti did not walk toward it immediately. She stayed by the sink for a moment longer, listening to the faint sounds of the street. A bus passing slowly. A radio playing somewhere far away. When she finally returned to the table, the message was still there. 3 lines. She read them once, then placed the phone face down again. No reply. Later that week, another rehearsal schedule circulated among the production team. Several names had been removed. A few added. One name remained printed in the center of the page, unchanged. But beside it, someone had written a small question mark in pencil. The page was folded before anyone answered it. In the apartment, the script stayed closed on the table, the paper marker still halfway through the story. The clock on the wall continued its quiet rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Outside, Johannesburg moved through another evening. Cars passing, people talking, lights turning on in windows across the street. Inside the room, the curtain lifted slightly with the wind. The table remained where it was. The phone dark, the notebook closed, and on the wall, the photograph from years ago still caught the streetlight every now and then, the flash of an old premiere night appearing briefly before the room fell quiet again. The apartment looked different in the early morning. Not dramatically different, just quieter. Johannesburg was still waking up outside. A delivery truck rolled slowly down the street, its engine heavy, the driver tapping the steering wheel to some music only he could hear. Inside the kitchen, a thin line of sunlight reached across the counter. It stopped near the honey jar. The jar had been moved slightly during the night. Now it stood closer to the edge of the counter, catching the light like a small amber lantern. Leleti walked past it without stopping. Her footsteps were soft on the wooden floor. In the living room, the table still held the same things from the night before. The notebook, the script, the phone, but the chair had been pushed back. Not far, just enough to leave space. The window was still open. Morning air slipped through the curtain and touched the pages of the script. One page lifted, then another. The marker slid out quietly and fell to the floor, a thin strip of paper. It landed beside the leg of the table and stayed there. Outside, a bus stopped at the corner. Doors opened. People stepped down one by one. A man in a blue jacket adjusted the strap of his bag and crossed the street quickly. A woman followed, holding a cup of coffee in both hands. Someone laughed. The sound floated briefly through the open window, then disappeared. On the table, the phone lit up again. A message arrived. The screen glowed for several seconds before fading. No one touched it. In another part of the city, a small theater technician unlocked a backstage door. The corridor smelled faintly of dust and old paint. He switched on the lights one by one. The stage remained dark. A microphone stand leaned against a wall. Someone had taped a rehearsal schedule to a notice board. 2 names had been crossed out in red ink. A third name remained, uncrossed. The technician looked at it for a moment, then turned away and continued setting up cables. Back in the apartment, the curtain lifted again with the breeze. The script page moved slowly toward the edge of the table. Not enough to fall, just enough to shift. The word pause appeared again for a moment. Then the page settled back. Leleti stood near the doorway, not moving. Her sweater sleeve had slipped slightly over her hand. She pulled it back absent-mindedly. Across the room, the photograph on the wall caught the morning light. For a second, the glass reflected the entire window. The street outside, a passing car. Then the reflection faded. In the kitchen, the refrigerator motor started again. The small vibration caused the spoon on the drying rack to roll slightly. Metal touching metal. A faint sound. Leleti picked up the notebook from the table. She didn't open it, just held it. The cover had softened over the years, the edges worn smooth by time. Her thumb rested along the spine. Outside, 2 schoolchildren walked past the building arguing about something. One carried a backpack too large for his shoulders. The other kicked a pebble along the pavement. The pebble hit the curb. Stopped. They kept walking. The phone lit again. Another message. The screen reflected faintly in the window glass. Leleti glanced at it this time, just briefly. Then her gaze moved away. She walked toward the coat hanging over the chair, lifted it, folded it over her arm. The chair creaked slightly as the weight shifted. Across the room, the strip of paper marker remained on the floor, half hidden by the shadow of the table. The breeze lifted the curtain again. The fabric moved slowly back and forth. Back and forth. From somewhere far down the street came the distant sound of construction. Metal striking metal. A rhythm. Then silence again. Leleti walked to the window. The city looked brighter now. Morning fully arrived. Cars moving faster. People crossing intersections. A cyclist weaving between taxis. She rested her hand on the window frame. Behind her, the script page finally slid another inch across the table. Enough this time. The paper tipped over the edge, fell quietly to the floor beside the marker. 2 pages now resting on the wood. Open. The word pause visible between them. No one picked them up. Outside, the bus returned to the stop on the corner. Doors opening again. Passengers stepping down. A newspaper vendor unfolded a stack of papers and arranged them neatly on a small table. Wind flipped the corner of the top page once. Then it settled. Inside the apartment, the table remained where it was. The phone dark again. The notebook resting beside it. The chair empty. And on the floor, near the leg of the table, the fallen pages from the script moved slightly whenever the morning breeze passed through the open window. Night. Durban. The theater doors were already open, but the street outside was quieter than usual. A few cars passed slowly along the road, their headlights sliding across the old brick walls before disappearing around the corner. Above the entrance, a poster still hung under the yellow light. The paper had curled slightly at the edges, a photograph in the center. Leleti Khumalo. The image was from years ago, a stage photograph, her face turned toward the audience, eyes lifted toward the lights. Someone had taped the poster there weeks earlier. No one had taken it down. Inside the theater, the air smelled faintly of dust and wood polish. Rows of red seats stretched quietly toward the stage, most of them empty. A few people moved slowly through the aisles, speaking in low voices that faded quickly in the large room. Near the back, a theater worker stood on a ladder, adjusting a light. The metal frame creaked slightly as he turned a screw. Above him, the stage lights flickered once, then steadied. On stage, the curtain had already been opened. The black floor reflected a thin strip of light from above. At the center of the stage stood a single chair. Nothing else, no microphone, no music stand, just the chair. Someone had placed it there earlier during rehearsal. No one had moved it since. Backstage, the hallway lights were dim. Costume racks stood against the wall. Several dresses hung neatly inside plastic covers. One hanger had a small tag attached, a name written in thick marker. The tag moved slightly when someone walked past. Then it stilled again. In the dressing room mirror, the bulbs around the frame were still glowing. One of them flickered faintly. On the counter below the mirror lay a small makeup brush. Beside it, a folded sheet of paper. No one opened it. Further down the hallway, a door remained half-closed. Inside, the room was dark. Only the faint sound of the stage lights humming could be heard through the wall. Back in the auditorium, the technician climbed down from the ladder. He stepped into the aisle and looked toward the stage. The chair remained exactly where it had been placed, perfectly centered under the light. He checked his watch, then walked toward the exit without saying anything. Outside the theater, a warm night breeze moved through the street. The poster above the entrance shifted slightly. One corner lifted, then settled again. A taxi slowed near the curb, its driver glancing briefly toward the building before continuing down the road. Across the street, a cafe had nearly closed. The owner wiped down the last table while a radio played softly somewhere near the kitchen. A slow song. The theater doors remained open. Inside, the auditorium had grown even quieter. One by one, the overhead lights dimmed. The rows of seats faded into shadow. Only the stage remained lit, that single chair still standing in the center. Backstage, the hallway lights turned off as well. The dressing room mirror went dark. The corridor fell silent. A few minutes later, the theater doors at the back of the building closed with a soft click. Outside, the poster with Leleti Khumalo's name continued to move gently in the night air. Inside the theater, the stage lights were still on. The empty chair remained under the glow, and beyond the curtain, the dark backstage doors stayed closed.